Welcome to Blackman Folktales. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Frank sat in the expansive living room of their Abuja mansion, his head bowed as he listened to his mother's sharp voice echoing across the marble walls. She was going on and on about how it was high time he chose a bride, preferably from one of the elite families they associated with. To her, marriage was not about love but about alliance, prestige, and the reinforcement of status. She had already drawn up a mental list of potential wives for him, daughters of ministers, governors, wealthy entrepreneurs, and powerful politicians. But Frank's heart was restless. He had seen too much of the hollow marriages that were built on wealth and connections. Most of his friends who had been pressured into such unions lived in cold houses where luxury abounded but love was absent. He wanted something different. His father, Chief Anthony, who had lived through the same battles as a young man, noticed the distant look in Frank's eyes and knew the burden his son carried. That evening, when his wife retired upstairs to make yet another call to a family friend about marriage prospects, the old man called his son to his private study. The room was lined with books, family photographs, and the lingering scent of cigars. With a solemn tone, Chief Anthony said, "My son, if you truly want to find love, then you must go where love is untainted. Wealth is both a blessing and a curse. If you show it too soon, you'll never know who loves you for you. Hide it, disguise yourself as an ordinary man. Then, and only then, will you find a woman who sees you, not your fortune." Those words sank deep into Frank's heart like a revelation, igniting a fire of determination he had long suppressed. For days, Frank pondered his father's advice, torn between duty and desire. His mother's expectations hung over him like a storm cloud, and the weight of being the only son in such a wealthy family only made the pressure heavier. He was not just expected to marry, but to marry right in the eyes of society. But what did right mean? Was it a woman adorned in diamonds and designer gowns, whose smile only stretched as far as the thickness of her husband's wallet? Or was it someone who could laugh in the face of hardship, who would stand by his side even when the cars, mansions, and influence meant nothing? Frank longed for the latter. He remembered the stories his father used to tell him of growing up poor, and how his mother, the grandmother Frank never met, would sell vegetables by the roadside yet still raise her children with dignity. Somewhere out there, he believed, was a woman like that. The fear, however, was not just about whether he could find such a woman, but what his mother would do if she discovered his plan. Madame Veronica was as proud as she was ambitious. She lived for status, and she would never forgive him for associating himself with commoners. Frank knew he had to move in silence. He discussed his plan only with David, his loyal bodyguard who had become more of a friend than an employee. David was amused at first, but seeing the sincerity in Frank's eyes, he pledged his support. Together, they mapped out a plan. Frank would travel to Lagos, live humbly, and search for the one woman who could love him without knowing his wealth. The morning of his departure was bittersweet. He packed light, leaving behind his tailored suits, expensive watches, and luxury cars. Instead, he carried a few plain clothes, simple sneakers, and a heart heavy with anticipation. His mother assumed he was traveling for business, which was common for him, so she asked no questions. His father, however, clasped his hand firmly and whispered, "Remember, son, true love will test you. Don't give up when it gets difficult." Those words echoed in Frank's mind as he boarded the flight to Lagos. The transition was jarring, from the serenity of Abuja's luxury estates to the bustling, chaotic streets of Lagos, where life pulsed with raw energy. For the first time in his life, Frank checked into a modest hotel instead of a five-star suite. He instructed David to find them cheap clothes from the local market, determined to shed every trace of wealth from his appearance. That night, as he lay on the small hotel bed, staring at the ceiling fan creaking overhead, Frank felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. The path ahead was uncertain, and he knew it would not be easy. But deep within, a flicker of hope burned bright, hope that somewhere in the maze of Lagos, beyond the laughter of the pretentious and the stares of the scornful, awaited a woman who would love him not for his name, not for his wealth, but for the man he truly was. Frank's first week in Lagos was nothing like the life he was used to in Abuja. He and David deliberately stripped themselves of wealth and identity, blending into the chaos of the city like ordinary men. Gone were the tailored suits and polished shoes. Frank now wore simple shirts and sandals, his face clean of the aura of wealth that used to follow him. David, amused by the change, teased him constantly. "Oga Frank, I hope you know how to bargain for food now," he would joke as they haggled with roadside vendors over bowls of rice and beans. But beneath the humor was a serious purpose. Frank was on a mission to discover truth, to sift through the noise and vanity of life to find someone who saw him, not his money. Each day, they ventured into different parts of Lagos, busy markets, crowded bus stops, and small eateries. And each day, Frank tried to strike conversations with young women he met. At first, he was hopeful, even optimistic. But the responses he got quickly chipped away at his faith in humanity. Some women laughed outright at his modest clothes and worn sandals. Others mocked him for daring to speak to them. More than once, he heard comments like, "A beg, shift, poor man. Wouldn't you fit offer me?" Frank would smile politely, but inside, he carried the sting of rejection. Still, he pressed on. His father's words kept him steady, "True love will test you." And indeed, he was being tested. One afternoon, Frank and David decided to test just how shallow people could be. They entered a cafe, where a group of elegantly dressed young ladies sat, chatting loudly about their latest designer purchases. Frank approached one of them, his tone respectful, and asked if he could sit with them. The ladies looked him up and down, their eyes scanning his cheap shirt and slightly dusty slippers. One of them burst into laughter. "Can you even afford the water here?" she mocked, tossing her weave dramatically. The others joined in the laughter, and Frank quietly excused himself. David clenched his fists, ready to defend his friend, but Frank stopped him. "This is why I'm here," he whispered. "To see people for who they really are." That night, as he returned to the hotel, Frank couldn't help but reflect on the irony of life. He could buy the entire cafe 10 times over, yet he had to swallow insults from women who thought him beneath them. Still, he felt no anger, only clarity. If anything, their scorn only made him more determined to continue. He was convinced that somewhere in this vast city, there had to be one person who saw beyond appearances, one woman whose kindness wasn't measured by wealth. The days rolled into weeks, and though Frank met dozens of women, each encounter seemed to confirm his fears. Many were either too materialistic, too arrogant, or too quick to dismiss him. But Frank was patient. He woke each morning with renewed hope, reminding himself that love wasn't meant to be found easily. It was meant to be discovered in the most unexpected places. On one particular evening, while strolling through a bustling marketplace, Frank watched the rhythm of Lagos life unfold, traders shouting prices, buses honking, and the aroma of roasted corn filling the air. He felt a strange peace in the chaos. For once, he wasn't a billionaire's son, he was just a man walking among people who worked hard for survival. In that moment, he realized how much he craved not just love but also a connection to realness, to simplicity. He didn't know it yet, but destiny was about to answer his prayers in the most ordinary yet extraordinary way, a meeting that would change the course of his life forever. It happened on a humid afternoon when the sun cast a golden glow over the marketplace. Frank and David were strolling aimlessly, tired from days of fruitless encounters, when his eyes caught sight of her. She was standing by the roadside, a tray of freshly peeled oranges neatly arranged, her hands skillfully slicing them with practiced ease. Her appearance was simple, her slippers were worn but clean, her dress modest but well-kept, and her hair tied neatly. Yet, there was a glow about her, a quiet dignity that set her apart from the noisy crowd. Her smile, faint but genuine, drew Frank in like a magnet. "David," he whispered, nudging his friend, "that girl is different." David followed his gaze and smirked. Oga Frank, no fall hand This one look like she go get sense." Frank straightened his shirt nervously, instructed David to give him space, and walked toward her. When he reached her, Frank greeted politely, and Benny, the orange seller, responded with warmth. He picked a few slices and tasted them, savoring their freshness. When it was time to pay, Frank deliberately searched his pockets and put on a worried face. I must have lost my wallet on the way," he said apologetically. "I'm so sorry, this was my last money." He braced himself for insults, expecting the usual scorn. But to his surprise, Benny simply shrugged, her eyes filled with understanding rather than irritation. "Don't worry about it," she said gently. "It happens sometimes. Here, take this." She handed him a few extra slices and even gave him small change for transport. Frank was stunned. He had met countless women, but none had shown such kindness without expectation. "Wait," he stammered, pulling out money from his pocket at last. "It was a prank, I only wanted to see how you'd react." For a moment, Benny's brows furrowed, then she let out a soft laugh. "You're a strange man," she said. "But it's fine. Life is already too hard to be wicked to others." That moment sealed something in Frank's heart. He felt a spark, genuine, raw, and unlike anything he had ever known. They began talking, slowly at first, then with ease, as though they had known each other longer. Frank learned her name was Benny, that she sold oranges to support her younger siblings, and that she valued honesty above all. There was no pretense in her words, no desire to impress him, only truth. Frank, for the first time, felt he was seen not as a wealthy heir but as a man. Over the next days, he returned often, sometimes under the guise of buying oranges, other times just to talk. Each encounter deepened his admiration. But with every smile she gave him, every story she shared, Frank's guilt grew heavier. He was hiding who he truly was. The question began to haunt him, when she finds out, will she forgive me, or will she feel betrayed? Benny's kindness and warmth quickly became the highlight of Frank's days. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, often staying by her stall for hours, listening to her speak about life, struggles, and dreams. She was not sophisticated, but she was intelligent, grounded, and wise beyond her years. Yet, as their closeness grew, so did the whispers around the marketplace. Other traders began to notice Frank's regular visits, and tongues wagged. "That boy no look ordinary," one woman said. "Am I too bright for poor man?" But the loudest and most dangerous voice belonged to Kunnel, a local troublemaker who had long been interested in Benny. Kunnel had always admired her beauty and determination, but his advances had been rejected countless times. Seeing her laugh freely with Frank fueled his jealousy like fire to dry wood. He began spreading rumors that Frank was a fraud, a man hiding something sinister. Kunnel's jealousy soon turned into confrontation. One evening, as Frank walked Benny home after closing her stall, Kunnel blocked their path with a sneer. "So this is the man keeping you company?" he spat. "Benny, open your eyes. This one no get future. He is deceiving you." Benny frowned but remained calm. "Kunnel, I've told you before, leave me alone." Kunnel's eyes narrowed as he glared at Frank. "You think you can come here and take what belongs to me? Be careful." David, who had been trailing discreetly behind, stepped forward at that moment, his towering frame silencing Kunnel. "Walk away," David warned in a deep voice, and Connell grudgingly retreated, muttering threats under his breath. But the damage was done, doubt had been planted. Benny later asked Frank why he always avoided talking about his family or background. She had defended him before Connell, but inside, she couldn't help but wonder, who really is this man? The tension in the market only grew. Some women whispered that Benny was foolish for wasting her time on a man with nothing to offer. Others hinted that Frank was a liar. Yet, despite the doubts and rumors, Benny chose to trust her instincts. She couldn't explain it, but there was something about Frank, something good, something true, that made her believe in him. But Frank knew he was running out of time. The longer he kept his secret, the deeper her trust grew, and the more devastating the truth would be when it finally came out. He could feel the storm brewing, between Connell's scheming, the market's whispers, and his mother's looming expectations back in Abuja. His world was tightening into a knot of suspense. He knew the day of reckoning was fast approaching. The market had become both a place of joy and tension for Frank. Joy, because each day with Benny drew him deeper into love. Tension, because Connell's envy was beginning to boil over. Frank knew it was only a matter of time before Connell acted on his threats, but he underestimated just how far the jealous man would go. One scorching afternoon, as the market bustled with its usual chaos, Connell hatched a cruel plan. He stole a customer's wallet and, with careful deceit, slipped it into Frank's bag when no one was watching. Moments later, he raised a loud alarm, shouting, "Thief! Catch the thief!" Panic rippled through the market as traders and customers turned toward Frank, who stood bewildered. Within seconds, a crowd surrounded him, their eyes sharp with suspicion. David pushed his way through to shield Frank, but the voices grew louder. "Search him!" Connell shouted triumphantly, his face twisted with fake outrage. The crowd demanded proof, and reluctantly, Frank allowed them to check his bag. To his shock, the missing wallet was pulled out, and gasps filled the air. "CM! Thief!" Connell screamed, his voice triumphant. The crowd jeered, some hurling insults, others threatening violence. Benny, who had been watching from her stall, rushed forward, her heart pounding. She pushed through the mob, her eyes blazing with anger. "Stop it," she cried. "Frank is no thief." But the crowd was not convinced. To them, the evidence was clear. Some even demanded he be dragged to the police station. Frank stood silent, his heart heavy, not because he feared arrest, but because he feared losing Benny's trust. He could handle insults, but if Benny doubted him, his mission would collapse. Benny, however, didn't hesitate. She turned to Connell, her voice cutting through the noise. "You think I don't know you," she said, her tone sharp with accusation. "You have hated Frank from the beginning. You planted that wallet." Her boldness stunned the crowd into silence. Connell sputtered, trying to defend himself, but his nervous eyes betrayed him. Slowly, the crowd's suspicion shifted from Frank to Connell. One man stepped forward, glaring at Connell. "This not the first time you day caused trouble for this market," he said. "Better watch yourself." Though the mob dispersed, the incident left scars. Frank was shaken by how close he had come to being disgraced, and Benny was furious at Connell's persistence. But more than anything, Frank was overwhelmed by Benny's loyalty. She had stood up for him when no one else would. That night, as they walked together, Frank couldn't hold back his emotions. "Why did you defend me so strongly?" he asked softly. Benny looked at him, her eyes steady. "Because I know you. You are not a thief, Frank. Poor or rich, you have dignity. And I will never let anyone destroy that." Her words pierced his soul, both comforting and convicting. He realized that Benny had already given him what he was searching for, unconditional trust. But at the same time, guilt weighed heavily on him. He was hiding his true identity, and if she ever discovered it without his confession, the wound would be deeper than anything Connell could inflict. That night, Frank lay awake in his modest hotel room, staring at the ceiling. The time for lies was running out. He would soon have to tell Benny the truth, no matter the consequences. Weeks passed, and Frank's bond with Benny deepened. They laughed, shared dreams, and slowly, Benny began to envision a future with him. But her quiet questions about his past and family continued to gnaw at Frank. He dodged them gently, but he knew the time had come to stop hiding. One evening, under the glow of the streetlights, he asked her to take a trip with him. "I want you to meet my family," he said carefully. Benny frowned, surprised but curious. "Your family? You've never spoken of them," she said. Frank smiled faintly, avoiding her gaze. "I know. But you will understand everything soon." She hesitated but agreed. When the day arrived, Frank and David escorted her to the airport. For Benny, it was her first time boarding a plane. Her heart raced as she clutched Frank's hand, bombarding him with questions. "Where are we going? Who are your people?" He only smiled and said, "Be patient. You will see." The suspense both thrilled and unnerved her. When the plane landed in Abuja, Benny's breath caught in her throat. From the airport to the mansion where Frank lived, everything screamed of wealth beyond her imagination. Sleek cars lined the driveway, security guards stood at attention, and the mansion itself glittered like something out of a dream. Benny's slippers felt suddenly inadequate, her simple dress made her shrink inside. She turned to Frank in disbelief. "Frank, what is this?" she whispered. Before he could answer, the front doors opened, and Frank's parents emerged. His father smiled warmly, stepping forward to embrace his son. "Welcome home," he said, then turned to Benny. His eyes softened as he shook her hand. "You must be the young woman my son spoke of. You are most welcome." But Madame Veronica's face was cold. Her eyes swept over Benny's plain outfit, her modest braids, and her calloused hands. Her lips curled in disdain. "This is the girl?" she asked sharply. "This, orange seller?" The word stung Benny like poison. She looked at Frank, her heart shattering. "You never told me," she whispered. "All this time, you lied to me." Frank tried to explain, his words tumbling out in desperation. "I didn't lie, Benny. I just wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have." But Benny's heart was torn. She felt humiliated, betrayed, and small in the face of such grandeur. "You should have trusted me with the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you know how this feels? To walk into your world like a beggar?" She turned away, tears streaming down her face. His father stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "My dear," he said softly, "do not let the weight of this house blind you. Look at my son. His heart is yours. That is what matters." But Madame Veronica would not relent. "She will never be part of this family," she declared firmly, her voice ringing with finality. Benny felt trapped between two worlds, the love she had for Frank and the crushing reality of the life he had hidden. Suspense hung in the air as she faced the biggest decision of her life, to walk away from the man she loved or to trust that his reasons, however painful, came from a place of sincerity. The days that followed were filled with tension in the mansion. Frank's father treated Benny with warmth, encouraging her not to give up, but Madame Veronica remained an immovable wall of disapproval. She saw Benny as an intruder, a blemish on their family's prestige. Determined to break the bond between them, she devised a plan. One evening, she invited Angela, the daughter of a wealthy business partner, to dinner. Angela was the epitome of sophistication, beautiful, polished, and confident. She arrived in a sleek car, dressed in designer attire, her every movement exuding grace. Veronica introduced her warmly, her eyes flicking between Frank and Benny. "Angela is the kind of woman this family needs," she said pointedly. Angela played her role well, charming Frank's parents with witty conversation and refined manners. Though Frank remained cold, Benny felt the sting of comparison. Angela's elegance seemed to highlight her own simplicity, making her feel out of place at the grand dining table. After dinner, Angela made subtle jabs cloaked in politeness. "It must be quite an adjustment for you, Benny," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "From selling fruits in the market to sitting here in this house. But don't worry, with time you'll learn the ways of our world." Benny forced a smile, but her heart burned with humiliation. Later that night, as she sat alone in the guest room, doubt consumed her. Maybe Veronica was right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe Frank would eventually realize that someone like Angela was more suitable. Tears streamed down her face as she considered walking away before she was broken further. But Frank wasn't blind to what was happening. He stormed into his mother's chambers, his voice shaking with fury. "I will not let you destroy what I have found. I love Benny, and no amount of schemes will change that." His mother's eyes flashed with anger, but Frank stood tall, more resolute than ever. The battle lines were drawn. Veronica was determined to break them apart, but Frank's determination was equally fierce. He sought out Benny the next morning, finding her sitting quietly in the garden. Kneeling before her, he took her hands. "Benny, listen to me. I didn't choose you because you fit into this world. I chose you because you complete me. You are my peace, my joy, my truth. And I will fight for you, even if it means standing against my own mother." Benny's eyes filled with tears. She saw the fire in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, and she realized he was not playing games. Yet, the weight of his world still pressed heavily on her shoulders. Could she truly endure the storms that came with being the wife of a billionaire? Suspense hung like a cloud over them, as both knew the hardest tests were yet to come. The wedding day arrived with the city buzzing in anticipation. For Frank, it was not just a ceremony, it was a battle won, a love defended. The grand cathedral stood tall, decorated with white lilies, red roses, and golden ribbons. Guests arrived in luxurious cars, the media hovered with cameras, and the who's who of Abuja society filled the pews. Yet in the midst of all the grandeur, Benny sat quietly in the bridal room, her heart pounding. She wore a simple but elegant gown chosen by Frank himself, its flowing silk accentuating her natural beauty without drowning her in extravagance. But behind her calm smile, anxiety gnawed at her. Madame Veronica had not relented, and Benny feared she might unleash another scheme before the vows were sealed. What if she stops the wedding? Benny whispered to her friend Ngozi, who had come from the market to support her. Ngozi squeezed her hand, her eyes shining with faith. "If God is for you, no one can stop this. Hold on." Benny nodded, but her spirit trembled as the cathedral bells began to toll. Frank stood at the altar, his heart beating like a drum. He had faced corporate wars, billionaire negotiations, and hostile boardrooms, but nothing compared to the weight of this moment. He knew forces were gathered to tear them apart. Just as the bridal procession began, a loud commotion broke out at the back of the cathedral. All heads turned as Kummel stormed in, disheveled and wild-eyed, his voice booming. "This wedding must not hold," he shouted, holding a file of papers in his hand. Gasps filled the hall as he marched down the aisle, ignoring the security guards who scrambled to stop him. He waved the file high, claiming it was proof that Benny was still married to another man from her village. The accusation struck like thunder. Murmurs erupted, guests whispering in shock, and Madame Veronica rose with triumph on her face, as though she had orchestrated the drama herself. Benny froze at the entrance, her heart shattering into pieces. Shame and confusion consumed her. She had never been married. What lie was Connell spewing now? The chaos escalated. Veronica seized the moment, shouting, "You see! I warned you all. She is a liar, a fraud who only wants to trap my son." The church buzzed with scandal. Some guests stood, others shook their heads, and the atmosphere shifted from joy to judgment. Benny felt her knees weaken, tears brimming in her eyes. Frank, however, refused to let the moment slip away. He stormed toward Connell, snatching the papers and tearing them open. His sharp eyes scanned through them, and within seconds, he exposed the truth. The documents were forgeries, clumsy, poorly executed, and full of inconsistencies. "This is nothing but a desperate lie," Frank roared, his voice echoing through the cathedral. He turned to the crowd, his face blazing with righteous anger. "This man, Connell, has tried again and again to ruin us. Today he has failed for the last time." He handed the papers to the officiating priest, who confirmed their falsity. The guards dragged Connell out as he screamed in defeat. Benny trembled, overwhelmed, until Frank walked back to her, cupped her face in his hands, and whispered fiercely, "Nothing will take you from me. Not lies, not envy, not even my mother." His words broke the chains of fear within her heart, and together they walked to the altar, hand in hand, ready to finish what they had begun. The vows were spoken through trembling voices, every word soaked in conviction. When Frank slid the ring onto Benny's finger, the cathedral erupted in applause, though not everyone clapped. Madame Veronica sat stiffly, her lips pressed into a thin line. She had lost this battle, but her pride refused to yield. Still, Benny's radiant smile and Frank's unwavering gaze overshadowed her disapproval. As they kissed to seal their union, sunlight streamed through the stained-glass windows, casting a golden glow over them, as if heaven itself was blessing the marriage. Outside, the press captured the moment, headlines already forming: "The billionaire who defied all to marry the orange seller." The reception was filled with laughter, dance, and music, as guests marveled at Benny's poise and grace. She moved through the crowd with humility, greeting even those who had doubted her. By nightfall, Frank and Benny sat together, exhausted but elated. Benny leaned on his shoulder, whispering, "I never thought love would bring me here." Frank kissed her forehead. "This is just the beginning. From the market to the mansion, from pain to joy, we will build our world together." Yet, even in the glow of triumph, shadows lingered. For though Connell had been disgraced and Veronica silenced for now, Frank knew their story was far from over. Suspense hung in the air, whispering of storms yet to come, but for that night, love had won. The first weeks of Benny and Frank's marriage were like a dream wrapped in gold. The honeymoon was spent in Seychelles, where white sands and turquoise waters offered them rare peace away from the chaos of Abuja society. Benny blossomed in Frank's arms, no longer the timid orange seller from Lagos but a woman learning to navigate a new world of elegance. Yet, despite the paradise surrounding her, shadows of doubt crept into her mind at night. She could not erase the humiliation of Connell storming into her wedding with forged documents, nor the icy disapproval in her mother-in-law's eyes. Every time she thought of Madame Veronica's piercing stare, a shiver ran down her spine. Was it truly over? Or had the wedding been only the first battle in a war yet to come? Frank tried to reassure her, whispering words of comfort, but he too knew that trouble had not been silenced, it had only been delayed. Veronica was a woman of pride, and Connell a man of desperation. Both would not fade quietly into the shadows. Back in Abuja, while Frank and Benny enjoyed their honeymoon bliss, Veronica met secretly with a figure from Frank's past. It was Angela, The governor's daughter Frank had once courted briefly at his mother's insistence. Angela had been heartbroken when Frank cut ties with her, but Veronica fanned the embers of her bitterness, painting Benny as a thief who had stolen what was rightfully hers. Together, they formed a chilling alliance, bound by revenge and envy. Veronica's pride could not tolerate her son choosing a commoner over elite bloodlines, and Angela's wounded ego sought satisfaction. They began plotting in whispers, gathering information about Benny, twisting every detail of her humble beginnings into weapons. By the time Frank and Benny returned to Abuja, Angela had already started spreading rumors in high society circles, claiming Benny had trapped Frank with charm and deceit. The whispers grew, echoing in social gatherings and charity events. Benny, though intelligent and composed, soon found herself the target of cold stares and subtle mockery. It became clear that her new life, though filled with luxury, was also laced with venom. Frank noticed the shift in the air but refused to bend. He confronted his mother, demanding she accept Benny as his wife, but Veronica remained unmoved. "You may have married her," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "but I will never recognize her as my daughter-in-law. Mark my words, Frank, this marriage will not last." Frank's anger flared, but Benny, ever the peacemaker, held his hand and whispered, "Let her be. Time will prove her wrong." Yet Benny herself felt a tightening in her chest, as if fate was preparing her for storms she could not yet see. That night, as she lay awake beside Frank, she thought of her parents back in Lagos, the joy on their faces when they saw her wedding convoy arrive at their humble home. She vowed she would not let them be disgraced. But little did she know that Veronica's alliance with Angela was only the beginning, and that the battles ahead would test not only her love for Frank but also her strength as a woman who had risen from the dust into a world determined to cast her out. The first true test came during a prestigious charity gala, an event that Frank and Benny could not avoid. It was Benny's first public appearance as Mrs. Frank Anthony, and every eye was fixed on her. She wore a graceful emerald green gown, simple yet elegant, with minimal jewelry that highlighted her natural beauty. Whispers rippled through the crowd as she walked beside Frank, some admiring her poise, others sneering quietly. Angela was also in attendance, her entrance dramatic, her gown glittering like stars, designed to overshadow Benny. The evening began smoothly until Angela, with a smile as sharp as a dagger, approached Frank and Benny. "Oh, Frank, it's been so long," she purred, ignoring Benny entirely. "I see you've settled." Her words dripped with condescension, and the women nearby giggled behind their hands. Benny's heart pounded, but she stood tall, her eyes calm as she responded softly, "Yes, he has settled, with the woman he loves." The remark silenced the giggles and made Angela's face flush with fury, though she quickly masked it with a smile. Later that evening, as Frank excused himself to handle a business call, Angela seized her chance. She cornered Benny near the buffet table, her words venomous. "Do you really think you belong here? You're nothing but an orange seller in borrowed gowns. This world will chew you up and spit you out." Benny's chest tightened, but she refused to let Angela see her break. "Maybe I was an orange seller," she replied steadily, "but at least I know the taste of real work, of real love. Can you say the same?" Angela's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You'll regret crossing me," she hissed before sweeping away in a cloud of perfume and malice. Benny tried to hold herself together, but as the night wore on, she realized Angela had already begun her assault. Several high society women who had been cordial earlier now turned cold, offering only tight smiles. Rumors had begun to spread like wildfire, questioning her background, her education, even the legitimacy of her love for Frank. By the time they returned home that night, Benny felt drained, as though she had fought a war she never asked for. Frank noticed her silence and pulled her into his arms. "Don't let them break you," he whispered. You are my wife, my choice, and my world. That is all that matters. His words gave her strength, but deep within, she knew the battle lines had been drawn. Veronica and Angela were not backing down, they were just beginning. The test of fire had started, and Benny would have to walk through it with resilience, faith, and courage. That night, as she knelt in prayer by their bedside, tears streaming down her face, she asked God for strength, not just to endure, but to triumph. She didn't know what shape the storm would take next, but she resolved that when it came, she would not be the fragile market girl Angela and Veronica expected. She would rise, stronger than ever, ready to defend her love, her dignity, and the new life she was building. Thank you for watching Blackman Folktales. Kindly subscribe for more stories.